So tonight is about motivation and mindsets. I'm going to do a little intro to that before handing over to Darrin. It's based on my book, right?
Sorry.
But, you know, hey, this is an entrepreneurship class, Darrin. It's about unlocking the enterpriser inside because of this question of, you know, can they be taught or not and so forth. But I'm only giving you one chapter of it, which is, what do we mean by entrepreneurial learning? What does it actually mean, this concept? Because I run something called the Center for Entrepreneurial Learning. In the context of what we're talking about, mindset and motivations, we are a huge emphasis on the personal awareness issue. And this is what mindset and motivations is about. Is this for me, this entrepreneurial thing? I mean, you're coming here, you're curious, you're doing research, you're studying graduate studies, etc. Question is, therefore, what are your personal circumstances? Does your family back you up? Do you have debts, student debts you need to get rid of? Does the venture give you a buzz? You know, do you really enjoy the idea that's coming to you? And then things like, you know, how big is the idea need to be to get me out of bed? Is it something that's will work for the community? Is it something that's global? Is it venture capital backed? Is it a social enterprise? What sort of business is it that's going to actually run all those hot buttons for me? We started talking about some of that last week. Social skills is different. This is about skill. This is things like building teams, pitching, negotiating, selling, networking, time management. That's why I put such a lot of emphasis on the networking that follows a typical Enterprise Tuesday, is getting people into the habit of talking to strangers about ideas. And then finally, the business. If you're going to go into business, guess what? The business actually has to work. So you need to know about business. You need to know about planning and marketing and strategy and cash flow and finance and all that sort of stuff. So, you know, without that, the common sense understanding of a venture, it's actually difficult to run it. So somebody in your team needs to understand that, but all the team needs to figure out, is this for them? And is this team for them? Is the venture for them? So these are the issues around motivation and the mindsets of whether the glass is half full or half empty. How do we approach life? And usually when you look at scientific discovery, it is done through incrementally quizzing things and problem solving. Whereas the entrepreneur's mind is something called appreciative inquiry, which is, I'm looking for the good in stuff. Where is the opportunity? You know, let me find that. And this is fantastic. Let me go hunt it down. As opposed to there's a problem here, there's a problem there. Rather than finding the sixth reason to shut something down, a typical entrepreneur is looking for the six things that are going well that he can jump on, latch onto, and take opportunities. And I'm sure we'll hear much more of this shortly. Now, just to give you something to think about, many of you have got blank sheets of paper in front of you. If you haven't, can we just make sure that you do all grab hold of a blank sheet of paper? We're going to do something for about 5 minutes to distract you. I'll give you instructions. We just make sure the blank sheets of paper are circulated. Let's have a bit of fun this evening to start with, shall we? Anyone not have any paper yet? You all got some paper? Those of you at the back that are standing or sitting on the steps, come on down, there's plenty of space. You'll all be familiar with the university's coat of arms. I imagine you've seen that crest on all the banners at the university of various kinds, badges, etc. So I'd like you to try and develop a coat of arms for yourself this evening around 4 topics. And here's how it's going to work. Just very quickly draw a shield on the bit of paper and four quadrants. That's step 1. If you get really creative, you can draw it as a circle because you're Genghis Khan instead of, you know, Richard III. Now, on the top left-hand corner, using pictures or words, write down 2 or 3 ideas of things that make you happy. What makes you happy? And I don't want to hear sex, drugs, and rock and roll. That's not, okay. It might do, but let's keep it clean tonight. What turns you, what makes you happy, generally speaking? The right-hand quadrant, what do you think you're good at? 1 or 2 things, or 3 or 4. Big ego, 10 or 15. What makes you happy? What are you good at? Bottom left-hand side, what values do you bring to your thing? You know, what do you believe in? What are your values? What are your family values? Things like trust, relationships, speed, action, act, do your duty, those sorts of things. Things that might come from your, personal beliefs, religious beliefs, family beliefs, that kind of thing. What informs you of kind of the who you are? And finally, the bottom right-hand quadrant, it's like a strap line, like Nike thing is the tick, which is the action thing. It's what do you want to be known as? How do you want to be known? 2 or 3 words, 3 or 4 words. Let me give you 4 or 5 minutes to write this down and then talk to your neighbor about it. So let me explain what the coat of arms is looking for. The sort of, if you like, the theory behind the bit of paper. It'll take me about 30 seconds, 1 minute to do that. And then maybe you can discuss the coat of arms with your neighbor for a couple of minutes each way, okay? So the happiness thing is really about motivation. In the end, you're going to do stuff that makes you happy. If it's in business, if it's making money, if it's getting a discovery to market, if that's what makes you happy, that's what makes your team happy, that's the sort of stuff you'll do. So it's a one simple word thing that describes about 50 years of research in psychology, what makes you happy. 90% of the shields that I see will be family, mountains, racing cars, music, paintings, freedom, openness. So these are a variety of things that you'll hear some of that from Darrin, so I'm not going to steal his thunder. What you're good at is the cup half full, half empty aspect of the entrepreneur. Because if you've got some resources and you're good at with those resources, your skills, things that you're good at, then that's what you should probably be building on, right? And you will identify, no doubt, through some other analysis, stuff that you need to learn and improve on. But hey, why not build on stuff that you're good at? So if it's inquiry, if it is sales, if it's networking, if it's resource gathering, whatever it is, what are you good at? Let's build on that. And your values are the things that you and your team members will be most affected by when you start to try and start some kind of a venture. If you believe in different things, for example, I had a bust up many years ago in my company where I wanted to plow the profits back to build the business, but my business partner, after several years, decided he wanted to take the money out to put into his personal pension plan, right? Because he didn't trust the way the market might be going, so he wanted to take the money out, I want to leave it in, and you can't go any further forward with that. So we had to part company. How you want to be known is quite important because that involves your reputation. That involves a kind of a sense of vision of where you want to be in the future. So it rolls a lot of stuff into the direction of travel. Do you want to be known as an entrepreneur, as an academic, as an engineer, as a researcher? How do you want to be known? As a good parent, as a good sibling, son, daughter, whatever it is. So all those sort of things matter, especially if you're in a team. So we'll be touching on these things, and these are hugely important, so-called soft skills in entrepreneurship. The harder stuff, the stuff about writing business plans and doing cash flow and so on, that's the stuff we get 90% of the time in entrepreneurship. But these things matter to individuals about whether or not they actually want to do this stuff. We will do a little wrap-up at the end, but let me not waste any more time and begin to introduce, if I may, Darrin Disley, who is here with us for this evening. He's a serial entrepreneur. He calls himself parallel entrepreneur, which means that he's got several businesses on the go at the same time and several investments on the go. So he is somewhat of an expert, I think, in the area of startup and investment, especially as he's raised about $75 million of investment funds from a variety of sources and closed about $150 million of deals. So he's a proper entrepreneur here. Horizon Discovery is responsible for corporate development at Horizon, corporate development, business strategy, investor relations, and therefore you will be in great favor with the MBA, so we'll be forming an orderly queue, I suspect. Top line revenue growth, 100% each year, and 364% increase in exports, all of which have led to numerous awards to him and to his company. But he's also very generous with his time because he does the speaker circuits for us, for the students. He supports Cambridge University entrepreneurs, and he understands the value of what we're giving back, and because he's been successful, he's giving back. I'd like a very warm welcome to our entrepreneur in residence, Darrin Disley. Thank you.
So that was an interesting exercise. So I'm actually going to share with you at the end what mine was at age 45. And then I want to share with you what it would have been when I arrived in Cambridge as a mature student, 24-year-old, who'd all I'd ever done before that was play football for a living. So it might be interesting for you to see, and I'll try and tie it in with the talks on mindsets and motivations. I'm actually pretty staggered that this number of people would make it out on a Tuesday evening for an entrepreneurial event. You know, I've been really impressed with Cambridge. I mean, Cambridge changed my life. You know, you'll see I have an unusual background, but it fundamentally changed my life and has given me the same life as an entrepreneur that I had as a professional athlete. I get out of bed every day and I love doing what I do, and Cambridge fundamentally gave that platform for me to develop my skills and explore a different side to myself. And as Shai says, I'm a great supporter of young entrepreneurs. I believe in ethical entrepreneurship. I believe our job is to give it back. I feel our generation has taken more than its fair share of the future profits and industrial output, and it's up to us, those who have actually done something and made some money, that's created some space, that's important that we put back into the community and give you guys the opportunities to share in some of the experience that comes, the great journey of being an entrepreneur. Okay, and hopefully I'll sort of get some of that across to you today in this talk. So this isn't a talk I've given before, so those of you in the MBE program will be very glad about that, because I'm not retreading the talk you heard a couple of weeks ago. So I want to talk today about mindsets and motivations. Most of my talks start off with a little bit of academics, and then I try to permeate that with the real life experiences that I've had and try and relate it to the sort of situations you might find yourself in over the next number of years. So first of all, I want to start with definitions about what is a mindset, what is a motivation. So a mindset, in my view, is a fixed mental attitude or a predisposition, and this determines your likely responses or interpretations of a particular situation. Okay? It's usually pretty firmly ingrained in you as to what your mindset is. Now, I'm throwing out controversially here a couple of things. I don't necessarily agree with them 100%, but we shall see. This is from Professor Carol Dweck at Stanford University. She says that in a fixed mindset, people believe in their basic qualities, like where they come from, the intelligence or talent that they have, are simply fixed traits. And that if you spend time developing those skills and traits and documenting them and achieving versus given milestones, that will get you there, that talent alone will create the success. So that's one position. The second position is a growth-based mindset, where people believe that their most basic abilities or traits can be developed through a dedication and hard work, that the brains and the talent are just the starting point, and this view leads to a love of learning. And that love of learning overrides the desire to achieve, to collect chattels, to collect wealth, etc. And the argument is that this creates a resilience in you as an individual, and that is essential for great accomplishment. Now that's the theory. I would just like to throw out a question here for those of you in the audience. How many of you think you are a fixed mindset by this definition? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, about less than 10. And we've probably got several hundred in the room. How many of you definitely feel that you are a growth-based mindset? Oh, that's interesting. For those of you who said put their hands up again, the fixed mindsets, those people, because I want to point you out here, right? This definition precludes, in most of your mind, probably the transition between one mindset and the other mindset. I was absolutely, in my younger years, growing up in a working class family in the East End, 7 kids, 2 mums, my dad in prison, growing up in a really environment with no education, leaving school at 15. I was a product of my environment growing up, and but I had some skills, I had some talent. I was good at sport. I was pretty bright, even though I didn't have any education. And I was a fixed mindset. I felt that this is the way that I can achieve moving forward, and by documenting successes, achieving against milestones, that would make me successful ultimately. I'd like to say to the 10 people, you're the only 10 people in the room who have a real opportunity at becoming a growth-based mindset, because you're able to accept what is potentially some limitations right now. Most people refuse to accept the limitations. They don't learn and accept who they are, and they go on believing that perception, and many people here, sorry, will have put your hands up based upon you wouldn't have wanted a negative perception of you from others by claiming to be this more limited, fixed mindset. So that was just sort of throwing something out there. It's not as simple as the academics dictates. Now, motivations are somewhat different. I mean, motivations, I think it's very clear, you probably all understand this. A motivation is a course of action that's driven by a purpose. Okay, you want something from it, you need something for it, you're driving towards a goal. It energizes your behavior and sort of really makes you focus that energy on the achievement of that goal. Now, again, the academics say that behaviors are directed by a physiological or psychological want or need. And if we look at this shopping list here, some of them can be interpreted in a positive mindset, a negative mindset, and it'd be interesting for you to consider about yourselves. People have a need for connection. You know, it's one of the reasons why we come to university. You want to connect and link with people who are of a like mindset. If you're a person of faith, one of the reasons for coming to a church is a sense of belonging and understanding and sharing your views. There's a need for a connection. There's also a need for stimulation. You know, we all need to be stimulated and challenged. You know, when you go to a lecture with someone who's inspiring you and leading you, it is a stimulation. If you go to one that, I've been to quite a few in my time, that want to put you to sleep, it's not stimulating. Independence. As potential entrepreneurs, I think nearly all of you would recognize this trait, the need for independence from other people. Okay. The need to improve oneself or the need to prove oneself. They're positive and negative sides of the same coin. The need to help others. You know, we've got plenty of educators in this room and plenty of people who will become educators, whether it be as a primary career or, like myself, as a secondary career post being an entrepreneur who sets up businesses. The need to be recognized, peer recognition, whether you're a scientist or you're a business person, you're a sportsman, etc., you need to be recognized. And then finally, the need to have monetary reward. Monetary reward doesn't have to be greed, chasing destinations. It can be a currency of success, recognition of the achievement. So in of itself, it's not a negative thing. As entrepreneurs these days, people are just often saying it's a bad thing. They're money chasers, not paying their fair shares of tax, etc., etc. But it's important to have monetary reward because along with peer recognition and something, they are the currencies of your success. Something I do believe in is the hedonic principle. No matter what area of life you're in, we're all motivated to maximize pleasure and minimize pain, whether that's in our personal lives, and I'll use some examples of myself, which will probably be a little bit uncomfortable later on in the presentation, whether you're an aspirational person who strives to succeed and set up billion-dollar companies, whether you're a criminal. Some people commit crime to maximize pleasure. Some people commit crime because they're trying to minimize pain. You know, so you think about these things, and almost everything that I think about myself comes back to this hedonistic principle. The theory, again, argues that mindsets become fixed for life at an early age, but that motivations are more situational. I don't necessarily agree with that theory. I think there's a clear path for transition back and forward between these mindsets. If you look at the vast majority of small businesses, they are today what they were when they started. They could be a one-man band, a one-product company, etc. Does that business owner demonstrate an entrepreneurial mindset? Or is that business driven by a motivation to be independent? Why hasn't that business evolved? Is setting up a lifestyle business, for example, entrepreneurial? It's an interesting one, and maybe we can discuss it in the Q&A. Whereas I look at what entrepreneurs are, you like an author. My view of an entrepreneur is like an author. If you look at the great entrepreneurs, and I'm going to use Richard Branson and Mark Zuckerberg as an example in this sort of thesis, is you must think about as though you're about to write a book. Now, what would your book say? As the author of your book, what do you want to impart on the reader that will truly transform the way they think about their life, go about their way of life, and think about their success in the future? So my experience is as you go to work on your business, you must get beyond the day-to-day grunt of let's do it, implementation, implementation, implementation. Yes, you must implement on your business plan, but you must let your business plan live and breathe, and you must put your core values on the story you want to tell into the genes of your business, and you want to change the way people do things. And that's what most of the great entrepreneurs have done. I'll use an example, Richard Branson, for example. He decided that he wanted to be disruptive to the way first the airline industry was run, but then a whole range of other things, and he developed products and positioned his products in a way that challenged the status quo. So coming up with the first premium economy system, a business class seat with an economy class service, running in all the competitive routes to British Airways, for example. He did that, not having a first class suite, having an upper class suite, positioning above the business class, between the first class, treating you like you're the highest rank on the plane. Whereas if you're in British Airways, you're flying Club World, you've paid £3,500 for a ticket, and they're still treating everyone up front better than you. So he chose to be disruptive in the way he went about business, and created the Virgin brand as a means of being disruptive. And he's done very similar things in the media world, in the train world, perhaps not been as successful in that area, but in the money world too. So he wanted to sort of have everything he did have that sort of message permeate through it. And then you look at people like Mark Zuckerberg, but you could look at Steve Jobs as being another example, is they operated what's called the hacker mentality, which is, I don't know if any of you have read that particular article, where by operating an open source platform, his theory is he just wanted to provide a platform to connect people, to enable them to, he didn't think about monetizing it. The monetization has come much later. It was how do we connect people? How do we make people interact with each other in their daily course of lives, to introduce people, bring buyers to sellers together, bring social communities and networks together? And that was the key thing. And then how do I open that platform and allow other people to bring down their innovation on top of my platform? So, and that, that was a cultural thing that he was trying to do there. It wasn't driven by, I want to set up a company, I want to deliver product X, Y, and Z, and I want to get X, Y, and Z out of it. So I encourage you, when you set up your businesses, to really think about what your story is. Okay? And that story will help you evolve that business. That business will be longer-term sustainable, in my opinion. So what are my entrepreneurial mindsets and motivations? For me, it was a journey of self-discovery from someone who came from a very limited background, educationally, fiscally, and pretty much every other way, is how do I learn about myself, and how do I learn about others, and how to interact with others and to get the best out of me and others. My motivations were very much about independence, but not independence in the conventional sense, and you'll hear when I talk about that in a moment. I definitely had a need to prove myself. I had a need to help others. I sort of definitely get most out of life when I'm actually helping others. And the need to be recognized. I'd say that from my point of view, that was initially a negative characteristic, but I think has turned into a more neutral, positive characteristic. And the monetary reward was purely in order to create freedoms, to enable me to do other things, not to collect the next million and the next million, the next million beyond that. We start to get in a little bit of more uncomfortable stuff now. Nearly everything I've achieved in my life has been driven by mindsets and motivations that were a direct consequence of influences that occurred in childhood to me. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in the next slide. I would say now I'm definitely a growth-based mindset, but I evolved from a fixed mindset in earlier years. The real benefit to me of evolving that way is that you tend to be able to put past experience, no matter how traumatic it is, into a perspective. So when I came from a very impoverished background, a very abusive family, and it enabled me to really sort of toughen up. It's weird, because when you're the subject of abuse, you tend to not see it in the same, shock, horror way that people who are outside of you see it. They tend to be more sorry for you than you are for yourself. And that was certainly the case in my instance. It was just things that happened to me. But it enabled me to have some intrinsic motivations, which was, how do I get out of this type of living? What can I do to make a difference in my life? How do I become independent of this? And how do I use my abilities to take me somewhere else? So that was a negative mindset, but it drove me to achieve things. I think now I have similar things. I have the need to prove myself and show I can do things, etc., but it comes from a more positive standpoint than it once did. So it shows how these mindsets and motivations can shift throughout your life. One of the things I absolutely do not regret at all from having a tough upbringing was it really did make me have a perspective. No matter how low something, I mean, I always just am flabbergasted when you see all these incredibly talented people here who have come to one of the best universities in the world, and they're panicking about, are they going to get a 2-1 or a first? You know, for me, everything was just biscuits and gravy when I got here to Cambridge. And you know, you've got wonderful lives ahead of you. So I was able to put it in perspective. I didn't put unnecessary pressure on myself in certain situations. And then when things get tough, I've really been able to sort of dig in and work. Most of my businesses, in fact, all of my businesses that have been successful, I've had 2 failures, and they were both failed with companies that started in boom periods. All the businesses that have succeeded were built in recessions, and one of the lectures I give on the circuit is building businesses in recession. There's no doubt having this kind of mindset, some of the more negative influences in my past, helps in those tough situations. Okay, so I just want to use a couple of examples from my startup, my track record, if you like, the good, the bad, and the ugly, but in the context of these mindsets and motivations. The first business I was involved with, actually, I don't put it up in here because I wasn't actually meant to be doing it. I was a postdoc for Professor Chris Lowe here, having done my PhD for him before, and during the postdoc, I set up a business called Xanax, which I didn't know at the time was named after a mental illness drug from Pharmacia and Upjohn. So I pretty much made every mistake in the business that you could possibly imagine in this business, including spending half of my £10,000 startup on glossy brochures and spending royalty rights images with a guy holding a globe on his hand and expecting everyone to call the phone to ring off the hook and people give me money. In reality, no one called for 6 months, but it enabled me to sort of learn some difficult lessons. And then I got the business going, and we were able to turn over a significant amount of money, about £350,000 in a couple of years. It was a part-time business. But my motivation behind doing this was learning, wanting to learn something about business. We didn't have all these lovely Center for Entrepreneurial Learning and all of these great things that have been set up by people like Peter and Shai. It was just, well, this is the only way I can learn. How do I take some of these skills and try and turn them into something business? Because I didn't want to be an academic researcher, so how do I do it? So I thought I would try. And the second thing was £40,000 of student debt. I think Shai referred to that in one of your slides. This enabled me to repay my £40,000 of student debt, generate a surplus of £20,000. So when I started my professional career, not knowing that I was going to end up as a lifelong entrepreneur, I was able to have some freedom of choice in terms of what opportunities might come along because I had some money in the bank. So that was the first motivation. Acumen was a company that spun out of TTP, the Technology Partnership, a very long-established business here. I was involved from the very beginning of that. It was a real great success story. The company is still going today as TTP LabTech. The technology was fantastic. The money was raised from AstraZeneca and Aventis, so there was no dilution of equity, et cetera, et cetera. And the business was very successful, and I did very well there. The motivation behind leaving that opportunity, even though it was successful, and whilst I wasn't enjoying it, there was no enterprise control. There was no shares given to the people who were the primary drivers in the business. And for me at that time, I felt like I'd worked 7 days a week, 15, 18 hours a day, and whilst it increased my pay 100% once and 50% twice, I mean, they're what you call pay raises. They clearly valued me, but they didn't value me enough to have shares and equity ownership in that business. So for me, it didn't tick those boxes and didn't fit in with my mindsets and motivations. In 2002, this was a company I had a lot of vision. It was my first attempt at putting what I thought should be a real narrative into a business. Raised initial funding. It became very difficult to raise a £20 million Series A round in 2001 when the World Trade Centers came down. But it was a very interesting experience. I made great networks. 2 of my investors in that, Imperial College Innovations and the Generics Group, even though the business didn't work, one gave me my first £250,000 contract in the next business, and the other one's just about to invest £10 million into Horizon Discovery. So even in failure, if you purport yourself in the right way and you deliver, you can build successes from that. The rest of it was about wanting to be completely independent. I didn't want to deal with venture capital. I felt they constrained your vision. I thought they set your business up for failure in a particular way. I've come around a little bit, but that was my motivation at the time, was I just wanted to to have enterprise control. But the real motivation behind these businesses wasn't because we loved these businesses. You know, these businesses are pretty dull and boring businesses, but they started churning cash. And the key to that was it then gave me the freedom, and I believe that entrepreneurship, through education, through the gaining monetary return on your efforts, enables you to create a freedom that enables you when an opportunity arises, a big picture opportunity, the chance to tell your story, that you are able to take it. If you have a mortgage with a £500,000 mortgage and you have 2 kids, all these things are wonderful and great, but if you aren't in a position to take that opportunity when it arises, as much as your mindset might be aspirational, you won't be in a position to take that opportunity. So those were years of hard graft, developing pretty boring businesses to churn cash to enable when the opportunity for Horizon Discovery came along. We're going to talk a bit about that company. We were in a position to invest in the business. I never pulled a salary out of Horizon Discovery for 4 years. You know, so I was vested in the business and taking a significant stake in its upside. And that was delivered by these previous opportunities, because when adaptive profiling came along, I saw the industry, the pharmaceutical industry, needed some transformation. And it just wasn't the right timing there. And the rest was really about how do we generate some capital, generate some freedom, so when this opportunity comes along, we're going to be able to tell our story. So that's what the rest of the presentation is going to be about. A couple of slides on Horizon's story, but from a motivation and mindset perspective. So our mindset was, myself and my business partner, we wanted to work with people that when we got out of bed every day, we were just grateful to get up and work with these people. There were people who had all the right mindsets, all the right motivations. They weren't driven by money. They were interested in making a difference for people and actually creating an environment where the best of academia and the best of industry could combine and deliver a profitable business and do it in a way that people say you can't do. So that's what this story is about. You know, we took it on trust that the destination, being success of the business, would take care of itself if we told our story well. So our motivation, and this is very specific to me, my motivation here was to show that you could build a UK life science company in the middle of a recession that brought technology in, that had 50 million of funding from US sources. And we went and got it and brought it over here. And then we immediately started being profitable in our first 2 years, not 3 years below the line and giving the venture capitalist control of your company by the fact you need to take money from other people. So we were profitable first, and that we could grow via the export of products and services. This is how much I believe in entrepreneurs. Tonight, the CSO of Horizon and another figure I nominated are at Buckingham Palace meeting the Queen, collecting the Queen's Award for International Trade, which was driven by this 364% growth in exports over the number of years. Only the 7th life science company since 1966 to win this award. Thousands that have won for innovation, but not many that have won for export-driven international trade. But I thought it was more important to do this kind of event than to collect that gong. But that was one of the drivers for us, to show that you could bring stuff here and export it back, ostensibly to the Americans, because they're always doing that to us. That would maintain enterprise control for founders. Why should you have to wait to be last out before you collect your financial return? Why should this investor come in and take control of your company through the legal contracts that come with the financing, and you wait to the very end until they've all had their share before you get what's left over? Horizon has returned. I was at a pitch this morning to Cambridge Enterprise, who are going to come in with a token investment into the D round. But this is where we started 4 years ago, promising them a 20x return on their investment. And they pretty much laughed at the time. But we've actually returned them 11x on their money, and they're still sitting with 20x of money in Horizon. So making returns to early shareholders. We've returned £4 million to founders, scientific founders and business founders. So we've done things that you're not supposed to do. We have an ordinary share structure. So the cleaner has the same share as the billion-dollar pension fund. You know, these are things you can only do if you succeed. So these were the motivations to show you can do this in the UK. And it's why I'm involved with Q. I wanted to get life scientists out of the lab. Stop thinking that you're going to have to wait until someone gives you £10 million to develop your product, and that's going to have to come from VCs and things you don't understand, and they're going to take control of your company, because that's the perception amongst a lot of life science people right now. And so I want to show you that by being entrepreneurial and having a really strong mindset, that you may have to compromise some aspects of it, but if you do make those sacrifices, you can get ahead of the game, and then you can flourish and run the type of business that you want to run. Okay? So we wanted to blend the traits of academia and industry. Many academic institutes here in Cambridge would be lucky to have 2 European framework cores in their institute. Horizon has 5 as a commercial entity. We have an entire academic research arm that is driving new scientific hypotheses, then we have a products and services arm. So this is a personal choice. If you get behind the curve, no investor is going to ever allow you to write your story. And then finally, this is going back to the CSO, his first view was none of this. It was, I want to make a difference to a single cancer patient. So there was a very clear, strong motivation there from the scientific founders. And from that, we've built a very successful company. But it was those mindsets and motivations that really drove this. If we'd have wanted to just make money, we'd have probably gone about it in a different way. And ironically, we'd have made less money. We'd have probably wanted to fuel growth far too early in the cycle. We'd have raised money much too early in the cycle, would have been below the line, would have been controlled by the contracts, and ultimately we would have been waiting till the end to get our money. So think about it, how you might achieve your motivation. And I think on my last slide, before we go into a Q&A, was just to show you that story. The key line there is revenue. If you can generate revenue in your business, you gain control of the business, because no one believes that you will hit any number that is ever put in your business plan. And we took advantage of that. So when even Cambridge University, who's used to dealing with early stage companies, laughed me out of the room when I said that we were going to take £150,000 in March 2008, and in 2013 we were going to have 3.2 million revenue and sell the company on a 6x basis. Today we went there where the company is now valued in 60 to 70 million pounds range. They've already had 11x, etc. So it just shows what you can do if you make things work for yourself. But it takes a lot of cracking and breaking of the eggs before you get to this stage. I learned a lot from my failures early on, and then I adjusted my mindsets. And by truly understanding who I was, I got to what the right mindset for me was and what the right motivations are. So that's where I'm going to finish, but we're going to open it up for a Q&A, I believe. Is that right? Okay. Not at all.
Not at all.
I may present it like that, but I use my East End upbringing, this apparent, like you're flying by the seat of your pants. It's a tactic.
So it's completely rational.
It's completely rational, incredibly planned. I mean, if you go through, I've had investors right now going through due diligence exercises with me, and they see the pitch, and I'm obviously a good salesman, and I'm good at pitching, and they're always wondering when the penny will drop, what's underneath, how do I probe? But if you master the detail of every aspect of your business, if you're, as a CEO, you need to be Mr. 70%. You need to be 70% as good as everyone who works in your C-level executive team. And the one thing you need to be 100% good at is sales. And so when they start probing, you actually are underpinning it with a great amount of detail and command of the subject matter. Intuition, you can sense when you're in the right game, but usually it's underpinned by some kind of analysis. I mean, we're just negotiating a term sheet with a big pharma company for our first drug asset at Horizon. It's a very large deal, $100-odd million deal if it comes off. Obviously, it could still be subject to due diligence. But when you're negotiating that, you can sense from the way people write things where they're coming from, and there is a bit of intuition there. But usually that's underpinned. You take it back and you can say, well, they're looking at things on a 15-year discounted cash flow basis on this regard, and they're looking at the early net present value of that deal structure versus the late net present. So it usually comes back. You have some intuition, but these people who say, I can just fly by the seat of my pants and I get it. Usually most of the entrepreneurs I know are incredibly detailed and planned people. What I would take them back to is when the Human Genome Project was published in 2001, and Bill Clinton and Tony Blair stood side by side and said, now we understand the blueprint of the car. Personalized medicine or personalized cars are just around the corner. Now, from my point of view as an entrepreneur, I thought, well, you're talking about the solution, the end point. In my experience, much more money is made by product sales by answering questions. The more questions there are, the more demand there is for your product. So when I looked at it, the way I posed it was different. Whilst the other scientific co-founder was focused on personalized medicine, and that is a big focus for Horizon, I was focused on this area of translational genomics. What does genetic variation mean? If there are hundreds of thousands of genetic variations between you, I, and everyone in a room, what does that mean? What does that mean on our predisposition of getting a disease? Once we've got a disease, what does it mean in terms of our likelihood of progressing badly, better? When there's a drug available, will we respond to it? Will we won't respond? These are all questions. So what we were saying is we positioned our technology as the Enigma machine that can break the code. So we weren't focused on we can create a pill that gives personalized medicine. We have a platform, an Enigma machine, that takes all of this genetic variation information and we can decode it and make it make sense to every academic researcher around the world, every clinician, every healthcare. So we didn't position ourselves as the solution provider, we just provided ourselves as the translator of this technology. So we didn't focus on that big picture, and we started small. And now we've succeeded. It does link into everything, and personalized medicine is a reality now. I don't think so. I think my mindset became pretty set once I'd got to probably 1999. I think that was the time where I think I'd gone through enough transition from this fixed mindset to actually understanding when I came to Cambridge, I was so narrow. I really couldn't believe how narrow I was. I'd studied chemistry after a football career, and all I knew was a bit of chemistry. All I'd ever mixed with is chemist. I came to Cambridge, and suddenly there was this massive sort of social experiment. I said, and the interaction with those people showed me the value of learning, and learning became the dominant theme in my life, not academic learning. I think those who come to Cambridge and just all they get out of it is a vocational education are actually missing the point. This is a privileged experience that you're undertaking, but the privilege doesn't just come from the fact you're being taught by excellent professors. It actually is the social interaction, the networks that you make for life. Nearly all of my businesses are involved in some way with networks that I generated at Cambridge. So my mindset became about education and that this is a great journey. And so when I set up my first business and I made all the terrible mistakes and then I had the failure in 2001, 2002, I didn't feel beaten by it. I felt this was like a badge of honor. I had a go. It's the biscuits and gravy analogy I gave earlier. I mean, how bad can it be? No one in my family's ever earned more than £24,000 a year. And so I know everything is just a bonus here. So my mindset was about the education and learning. I don't think I was honing in on the success. So I'm going to come back to this and tie it into that story. That is the mindset of a lot of life science. They see the future. But I challenge you back as an entrepreneur. Why does it have to be about your idea only?
Sure.
A lot of people get trapped in the mindset of, it's my idea. Is that entrepreneurial? Does that define entrepreneurial? Does technology transfer my science into a company and then I raise venture capital? Is that entrepreneurial, or is that the process of technology transfer? Whereas with a company like Horizon, what we looked at was, this is not a good time to be raising $50 million of funding for this. But we understand this area of research. We don't have any ideas yet that are cooked enough to enable us the opportunity to generate some early revenues. So let's go and find people working in the same research areas who do have technologies. You'll be amazed if you go around. Whilst we think we're the brightest things in the world and only Cambridge can do great ideas, etc., you'll be amazed at the great research being done elsewhere and people who have developed platforms and had created products. So with Horizon, the $50 million of NIH funding that was used to develop the platform had been used in 60 different academic labs around the world. So we went and found those 60 academic labs, and they had developed what we now have as products. So we were able to bring in a couple hundred products pretty early and then leverage those products into derivative products and services, and that's where we were able to generate revenue. But if it was my idea, one of my friends, Yen Xu at the MRC for Professor Sir Aaron Klug, developed the competing technology, the zinc finger nuclease platform. If we would have just been, where we can't compete with that, we can't do anything, you go into sort of like a state of paralysis. It's just the wrong time. We need to raise lots of money. So what we just thought was, well, here is an area, and we are experts in the application of this area. What we need to is find the tools to go in. So in a recession, when money is tight, this is the type of business you want to be looking at. So as life scientists, there'll be times when you can raise 10, 20 million for your big picture blue concept on your own idea. But many other occasions, you'll need to say, right, I'm an expert here, but where are the other groups around the world who are working in this? And can we together put together a technology platform that can lead to a business? So I would say that's acting entrepreneurially, whereas waiting for the tech transfer office to open its door and give you $250,000 and then go through a series A, B, C approach is not particularly entrepreneurial.
So, sorry, so the key is you have to have a product.
The key is you have to have something you can sell early. You can get early adopters by licensing a platform out, but you need to be flexible. It comes down to what I said, the same mindset that says I can only develop my idea. If it's not my idea, I don't want to do it. That's a similar mindset that when you do have an idea in a company, it's like, well, I can't sell it until it's ready. And I need 10 million from Peter's fund, et cetera, because I want to paint the building. Oh, we're not ready yet. Paint the building some more. Oh, and now I'll open it. No, I can't sell it to you for less than 2 million, because that's what it's worth. Whereas with Horizon, exactly the opposite approach was we didn't have a building. We were grabbing space in Torino from the Piedmonte region government so we could get a bit of lab here. We then had the pig shed in the middle of the Babraham. We didn't have any of these fancy buildings, but we were focusing on what was important, proof of the technology and closing deals. So we had deals with Genentech, Roche, et cetera, before we had investment. But we gave those deals away at a fraction of the price. But it gave us validation in the market space from the most successful biotech in history and gave us revenue. So when we went to people like Peter, they were like, wow, I'm not going to be funding all this myself. It's an interesting one. I'll be honest, I haven't. I mean, I've looked at a lot of social entrepreneurship programs and through Q and this World Startup of the Year competition that I was involved with, etc. I got experience with some of those people setting that up, but I don't have direct experience. But I would imagine Q, the people in Q or the people who set up Q like Peter will have some really good insights into this because they're looking all the time. Shen Wei, who works for me now at Horizon, was probably one of the most innovative presidents that they've had at Q in recent years. And they're constantly, how do you make this model work where you've got no money, no means of generating money? How do you persuade high net worth individuals, corporate sponsors through their social entrepreneurship programs, etc.? I think they're probably better people to speak to. But as a concept, it's the same as running a business, right? You've got to explain to people what it is, why they should care about it, who's going to buy it or use it in the case of a social entrepreneurship, and what's the tangible benefit to them. So if you're asking me for £100,000 to do a conservation project, clearly I'm not looking for financial return. You need to tap in. What are my motivations? What stage of life am I at? Am I in that mood where I want to make that difference? Am I legacy hunting? All these kinds of motivations that high net worth individuals have, you've got to tap into those. Yeah, I mean, there are definitely a number of courses that we run here. I mean, from my point of view, you need to be able to articulate very clearly and concisely and in a compelling fashion, what is in it for the purchase. When you buy from someone, if you're in a pub and I'm looking to sell you something like that, I need to sort of tap in to what your mindsets and motivations are. With investors, clearly they have a mindset that they want to make money. Etc. That's a very predominating mindset. So you need to have that very clearly. Right? But some of them do have secondary mindsets. They have interest areas. It's why they go and work as investors in a particular area, whether it be oncology or some form of medical device or social entrepreneurship, etc. And so you need to sort of understand who your customer is. And then when you're selling to a customer, the business plan is a given. Right? You need to be able to articulate in a business plan. But I think the real sales comes from the interaction. People buy from people ultimately. And sales is about a process of building confidence. So if you can articulate your message, what is my business? Why is it important? Why is it better than what has gone before? And then who is going to buy it? How I'm going to make money out of it? And what you're going to get back from making this investment. So you can make these presentations are available on CfEL, right? the perfect elevator pitch and various things like that. I think there's a podcast where I give a specific thing on this perfect elevator pitch. And so there are technical things that you need to do in terms of business planning, and I urge you to get involved with the Q process, because you will learn every step of the way, and there'll be people like myself, Peter, a number of other entrepreneurs who give their time who will train you in that aspect. But ultimately, in my experience, people buy from people. I've closed £250,000 investment deals standing in Costa Coffee. I've done $10 million deals with Novartis that were built out of Starbucks in Borders. In there, if you are selling, it's about personal relationships. Of course, the proposition needs to be compelling. You have to demonstrate need, value, return on investment that they're going to get, whether it be an investor or a customer. But ultimately, you need to build their confidence, because when you're in the shop, ultimately, greed at some point overcomes the fear of making the purchase. And in my experience, that is what you have to build that. You have to overcome that hurdle that people tend to have. They tend to find due diligence is a way of finding reasons not to invest. And then you need to continue through that process and give them that compelling reason to invest. At the end of the day, you've got to have a great idea. No one's going to invest in the trapezoid mug, right? No matter how good you present it, etc. You've got to have a good idea. You've got to present it in the way, in the format that people expect. Now, yes, there'll be some special lettuce, sauce, and cheese that makes your plans stand out, and we can teach all of those things. But ultimately, you've got to have a great idea. And once you have a good idea, most people that I know buy people. And when I've been going through this Q competition and mentoring people, and Steve was one of our young entrepreneurs of the year, Niels was another one. These are people that I would back in a heartbeat. You just felt that they would, when they got out of bed every day, this was their purpose for getting out of bed. And ultimately, they would walk through walls to find out whether this idea will work or not. There were lots of people, and many of them who won, who had great business plans, etc., but we didn't feel for a second that they wanted to be entrepreneurs, that they'd be working in McKinsey's before the year was out, teaching other people how to do it, having never done it. And there's nothing wrong with that. I've worked in many consultancies. This foundation was built on a consulting-based environment. But for me, I look for that person. Will they get out of bed, and will they walk through walls for you? Benefits of failing was I was able to really look at myself and try to understand why it failed and take responsibility myself. Many people don't take responsibility for why they naturally look, oh, it was the conditions, it was the investors what did it, etc., etc. In reality, you sign the contract. Whilst I moan about venture capital as a form of investment, I use it, but I use it in the appropriate context, and I sign that agreement. And if that agreement then goes the way of the pair, I'm the one who sold it. You don't blame someone else. So what it enabled me was periods of introspection where I was really struggling post some of these businesses. I had massive debts, etc. at these points. And the reason they failed, generally speaking, is one of a few things in the first year or two, I would argue, determine a business's success or failure. One is the people that you bring together, and the alignments of interest you're able to create with those people. So as scientific founders, if you're deciding, and this comes to mindsets or motivations, if one of the scientific founders has a fixed mindset, one has a growth mindset, they need to be honest about that. So you can then structure in the evolution of the business to align with those facts. What most people tend to do is the desire, the motivation to achieve whatever these things are down the line, override that, and people aren't brutally honest with each other at the foundation level. So when you get your founders together, you need to be on the same page so that you don't build in structural inequity moving forward. And I've done that in both the deals that failed. I built in a structural inequity into the company. Similarly, alignments of interest, the ego of raising more money than I needed. Oh, look at me, I can raise loads of money, etc., etc. But I brought the wrong type of money in at the wrong time. And initially, of course, I blamed it was in what did it. But having failed these, I then looked at this and said, look at this business adaptive profiling. We tried to raise too much money too soon. It was an incredibly complex business model. There were effectively 3 platform technologies, etc. We should have focused in on one particular area of that business, each one of those that could have made a smaller, more successful business than what we had as a dog's dinner of a conglomerate of technologies, if you like. So it enabled me to look at those particular aspects. I'm a great believer in open innovation. I don't believe the pharmaceutical industry, in the current healthcare paradigm, can succeed in this closed innovation format. Look at the inputs. Every pharma company buys the same technologies, adopts the same process, so they're paying for the same things hundreds and hundreds of times over, in the belief, the mindset that control of that information gives them massive competitive advantage. It doesn't. Every pharma company is working on the same drug targets. Whether they think it or not, they're all working on trust me, they're working on exactly the same drug targets. Once someone's got a new target, within a year, everyone's working on it. But so you're constantly spending, so the number of research dollars, the vast amounts of research dollars that get spent, that gets wasted, is due to this mindset. This mindset that if we keep everything closed loop, we'll get that one blockbuster drug and that's the problem, is the blockbuster drug paradigm is self-perpetuating the problem, because they're getting less efficient, not more efficient. Drugs are failing equally as far as when they're spending more money on the failure. And then eventually, the only way of succeeding is if you have these one big, so they're forced to swing for the fences. Now, translational medicine, personalized medicine, is altering that perception to some degree, but not in a rapid set. So that mindset is fundamental, whereas I believe in open innovation. With Horizon's technology, we do not charge academics. We've set up gene editing centers of excellence at the NIH, at Dana-Farber, several at Cambridge, universities all around the world, where we give them the technology for free. And they're working on, we can only work on oncology. So there are groups working on Huntington's, Parkinson's, cystic fibrosis, mouse editing, animal modeling, stem cell research, etc. And we allow them to do that, but in return, whatever they make comes back to Horizon, and then Horizon disseminates that. So they're acting as product development labs for Horizon. It's a model of open innovation, and we work with a number of companies. We're setting up a consortium called the Translational Proof of Concept Consortium, which brings together 50 service providers, farmers, biotechs, etc., that are putting the infrastructure in place to do massive genome-wide cell-based profiling, plus also pharmacogenomic diagnostic mice, so these like surrogate xenopatients in a clinic, so you effectively have a patient surrogate that's living with the person, but in an open environment, so that when a pharma company that's had far too much of Peter's money to develop their one asset, and they're forced to do a deal with a biotech or a pharma on a weak price, they can actually go through this consortium and develop their drug to a much later stage and get much better efficacy. But the last people to sign up to all of this are the big pharma. So they're still entrenched in that mindset. For me, the most difficult part has been dealing with people of alien mindset to myself. So when you in the first 20 people in a company, everyone, if you do it right and you get the alignments of interest with the founders, the right mindsets, the right motivations for doing things, it kind of takes care of itself. People do 3, 4, 5 jobs. I've done every job at Horizon, what you would consider the C-level executive jobs. I've been the operations manager, I did all the finance, I did the legals, I ran the R&D at different points. But there are particular points where you just have to realize you don't have the expertise at that next level, and you need to bring in people that you trust. And then my argument is you do that earlier rather than later, but that is fraught with danger. If you bring the wrong kind of people, there are plenty of people who hang around the Cambridge community and they'll all help you out for a stake in your company. They're not necessarily aligned with the interest of your company moving forward. So the key is whoever you get involved with, you need to really vet them very well on their mindsets and their motivation for being involved. And then you need to make them feel some pain from getting involved with your business. They can't come in on day one and take big consultancy fees and equity in your company and the full dog and pony benefits package. We made our early employees, even though they were employees, they worked for 3 months or more with no pay. We never paid our SAB. We got people like Professor Daniel Van Hoff on our board, SAB. This is one of the drivers of personalized medicine worldwide, writing all the legislation, initially with Barack Obama, then with John McCain on the personalized medicine bill. He can command £50,000 an appearance at a big pharma corporate venture deal to speak. We pay him nothing. We refuse to pay. You're either in it for the right reasons and you'll do work, or we don't need the brand. You know, so you've got to sort of really set your stall out. And it's hard to do first time up. I'm giving you, after all this experience, first time I'd have rolled over like a dog and they'd have been tickling my tummy, taking everything. They've had IV drips in my arms, sucking all the money out. I remember when I did adaptive profiling with Sagentia, or generics, great company. I won't say anything negative about them, but a great company, but I constantly felt like I was just blocking the dam. They put with one hand and they're sucking the money out with the rest, and I rolled over like everyone else because it was more important for me to have my job than it was to tell my story. Whereas now, you know, it comes when you've got a little bit of success behind your experience, or your perception is different. You don't need millions of dollars to say no. If you've got 100 grand in the bank, 50 grand in the bank, and you don't need to earn a paycheck the next month, you can say, sorry, not doing it. So with Horizon, when Millennium, our first major deal, came forward, it was only 150,000, but they wouldn't give us a press release. And it was important. And because we didn't have investors of the type that I've described earlier, etc., I was able to turn around and say, I don't need the money, you don't give us a press release, you're not getting the technology. Can you imagine if you had a board full of venture capitalists on there and you told them that the first big deal you're turning it down with the risk of losing it because you're not getting a press release? Whereas running my business, I knew it was important that everyone in the world knew we were working with leading edge players. So if you're able to create some freedom for yourself, and that can come from having some money in the bank, or it can just come from having a mindset where you just don't care, and you set out the stall. Some of these guys, you see them all the successful. You see the Zuckerbergs, the Steve Jobs, you see them all when they're successful. I used the Anita Roddick story at a previous talk. Everyone thinks the Body Shop was super successful on day one, had tons of incarnations before that, and eventually it took off and people wanted these horrible perfume-scented soap bars and things like this that you buy for granny for overpriced bits of money. But her biggest success, she said in a public interview, was surviving long enough so that when the opportunity came and the market was ripe for this, she was there to take it when it happened. I think first, and it's not because it will make you more successful monetarily. You know, it won't necessarily deliver you success, but I think it will deliver you success as a human being, in my view, is set out what really drives you, what really gets out of bed in the morning, what gets you out of bed in the morning. Because ultimately you have to do this for a long period of time. And all the other things that happen to you, constant rejection in terms of raising funds, you know, the managing people, all of these things like that, you have to do all of that. So when you get out of bed every morning, especially when you've eventually had some success, you've still got to get out of bed every morning and think, you know, when I get up in the morning, I still feel like, shit, what can I do today? What can I do today that's going to make a difference? How do I push things forward? That's a hard thing to do after a number of years. So you need to understand who you are and why you're doing something. So for me, it was about the journey of self-discovery, treating the success as the journey itself, not the destination, whether that be peer review, monetary reward, etc. So I'd say first thing is understand doing it. Second is alignments of interest. You know, there is no such thing as good or bad co-founders, investors, anything. They're just aligned or misaligned. If you don't have an alignment with the people you're working with, right, how can that possibly be successful? It can on occasion, but it will be the exception rather than the rule. And the suffering and pain that you'll go through will be directly proportional to that level of alignment. Okay? And I think that's two. I'm trying to think, the third one is, think about when you need to raise money and how much money that you raise, because ultimately it's very hard to build a business without some form of investment. I would encourage you first to exhaust every possibility of finding non-dilutive equity, whether that be a customer to do a deal with you, a customer, a corporate investor who has some strategic interest in your technology. Maybe they're a manufacturer who ultimately will manufacture your product, so they're investing on a different. Go for that soft form, grant funding, friends and family. Look at those as an option. They may not be the right option, but look at them first and see, is there a business model I can adapt? Can I be pragmatic that would enable me to get a little bit ahead of the game, that will get me into a position where I can negotiate better terms on the development of the business?
Pitfalls to avoid was the other part of the question.
Pitfalls to avoid. Whew, they're two edges of the same. So I would avoid I talked about telling your story through the company, and that is very important. You must do that. But you mustn't be so blinded by telling that story that you become oblivious to the situational demands around you, whether it be the macroeconomic climate, the investments. I call it the Voltaire mentality. You have to be prepared to be very pragmatic and dilute your vision at particular points, but hold it back and then bring things forward at another point. So I think the pitfalls is to be blinded, be blinded. And the second is to adopt too much complexity from someone who's done this in their business life. Big picture solutions can sometimes require very complex business plans, for example, and that's a very difficult thing to sell to anyone, not just investors, but to sell to other people who you want to be involved with your business. So avoid complexity, try and keep it simple. Horizon it's working in 7 or 8 different market areas, but it's building off one pivotal technology that is then just leveraged to generate revenue multiplier effects, etc. And we've avoided the pitfalls of now saying, well, we can do this, so we'll go over here and do something that's very complex. I thought this was useful, so I did one at 45, and in the happy column, what makes me happy? Enterprise control. When I get out of bed every day, I feel that I'm in control in some way of what I'm going to do that day. Counseling and mentoring. When I did I was a subject of the last round of the Myers-Briggs profiling, and I was one of the few responders, I think 0.03%, that came up with equal dominant themes: enterprise control, counseling and mentoring. I really sort of passionately believe in sort of sharing with others what I have. I like seeing others happy, and I like sharing what I've got. So that's the happy column. Good at, I think I'm good at inspiring others. Selling, and I think I have a very broad knowledge of technology applications in a lot of different sectors. Values, brutally honest in every aspect of my life. I believe that success is a journey, not a destination. And I think one that is absolutely essential for me is paying it forward. I'm not going to be one of those people who's going to be happy sitting around counting money indoors. I set myself a target of giving away half of my wealth from day one, and I've managed to achieve it, and I will continue to achieve it. Don't become a slave to the destination. And then the legacy, or if I called it legacy, I think I'd like it on my tombstone that he enjoyed the journey and maximized what he had. So I think that was what I feel now, but I think this will be interesting to you. When I came to Cambridge, I think this is what I would have felt at that point. Happy, peer recognition, money, and family. I think would have been the happy. Good at, sports, leading other, and I enjoyed chemistry. I was a chemist at that stage. Values was family is above all other. I just didn't realize at the time that your family doesn't have to be the people you necessarily grew up with. You can build a family throughout your life. Second is how people perceive me is more important than who I am. I think that's because I didn't understand who I was at that stage. I was too busy trying to convince people how good I was at particular things and achieving things, so I couldn't see the wood from the trees. And I would say legacy at that stage was for people to say, he was a talented all-rounder and helped others. So that just sort of shows you the difference in 20 years of being in Cambridge.